Hateley is a former Victoria Police Special Operations Group tactical team leader. He worked in the job for some 18 years, including in the St Kilda Bureau of Criminal Intelligence, the Major Crime Squad and the Protective Security Groups. Since leaving VicPol, George has established a security, consulting and investigation business. He's worked in close personal protection for many visiting rock and roll celebrities, dignitaries and VIPs. George used to supply and train people around Australasia in the use of tasers. He's a director of Breon Defence Systems who provide equipment and technology to law enforcement agencies around Australasia. Welcome to The Informer, George.
Thanks, Rochelle. Pleased to be here.
Now, as a former SOG member, how do Australian state police forces deal with protesters and protests?
Look, they deal with them in a fundamental, basic way. They do a lot of training. They're very flexible in their operational duties, and they plan and prepare everything. It may not look that way every time because they roll up to a scene and people just think they've just been bussed up there and they stand there. But there is an awful lot of training and preparation and planning in their duties.
How would you describe our current environment involving protesters?
Look, protesting has been happening since year dot. It just gets done in a different way. We've got social media that gather more people now spontaneously. But the police, part of their preparation and planning is to conduct a lot of intelligence into the protest groups, and in doing so they establish who the protest leaders are. Look, in the mainstream people are protesting in good faith, but you get anarchist type people involved that just want to agitate and disrupt any protest.
What do you think, as a former SOG and VicPol member, do you believe people have the right to actually protest?
Absolutely. We live in a democracy and we're allowed to protest. The rule of thumb with protesting is they need to adhere to certain rules and regulations that govern the way they protest, and it's based on safety. You've got to be safe in everything you do, and the police are mainly focused on people's safety, their safety and the community's safety. And so they have to introduce some rules and regulations in that forum.
The current climate, is it very different from when you were working in the SOG?
I don't think so. The SOG didn't deal direct with protesters, but previous part of my career I was involved in attending protests. And I remember one, there was probably 100,000 protesters there for the Newport Power Station back in, I think it was 1977. And that was confronting. There was a line of about 200 uniformed policemen. We were all very young and new, and we were facing this monstrous group that had a focus on getting their point across. And then the other protests I've been to, you have a lot of people that go there purely to agitate. They haven't really got their heart in it in respect to the actual point that they're protesting against. But
that's like the professional protesters, aren't they?
Yeah, it's annoying, both the police, but more so to the people that have really got a focus and are there in good faith.
What's your perspective about the civil unrest that's happening in the United States at the moment?
Look, the United States is a different country, it's a different culture, and we've got to understand that it's a different policing over there as well. Hopefully we never get to that stage of dealing with people the way they use a bit more force than we do here in Australia. And that comes down a lot of times to the leadership. We've got very good leadership in our police agencies here in Australia, very good training. So I'm confident that when our officers attend training, they do it in such a good manner.
Mm. What do you think is fueling this in the States, George?
Well, as I said before, leadership. It all comes down from the top. If you have poor leadership, and I'm not pointing the finger at anyone here, but If you have poor leadership, poor direction, poor communication, poor training, goes on, and you get people that are poorly trained. When I say people, officers that are poorly trained, they don't respond that well to a threat, a real and impending threat, unless they've trained for it. They'll stress out.
How do the US police operate, and how different is that from, say, our Australian police services?
Yeah, look, vastly different. I've been to America quite a few times, gone to a lot of conferences involving police over there and other countries. What you've got to understand, what people have to understand clearly is there's 8 police agencies here in Australia, one in New Zealand that we work closely with. In America, you've got some 18,000 police agencies, and keep in mind they emerged from the wild, wild west. You know, you've got, as an example, I went to a conference, sat next to a guy there and started talking to him, and I said, "You're a policeman?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What's your status?" He said, "I'm chief of police." He's in his 30s. I was a bit surprised by that, and I said, "How many officers have you got under your control?" And he said, 6 in his whole police department, 6. And there's smaller ones again. And we've got, you know, something like 12,000 in Victoria. We've got 20,000 in New South Wales. And the agencies are big here. They're well resourced, they're well managed, they've got great accountability. And officers indifferent to America, here in Australia, are very focused on their role. I was in the Special Operations Group every day of the week for the years that I was there. I've met policemen in America, and you talk about, if I talked about my background being a SWAT member that they recognise, 9 out of 10 said, "Yeah, I'm SWAT trained too." But they also conducted school crossings of a morning. They'd go out on patrol. We were focused, we trained, we were dedicated to that role. And they're just too small to be focused in that particular role, which you need to be focused.
Do you think it is specifically about training?
Training's mainly, it's mainly about training. And what you've got to think of is, if you're not trained very well under stress, you revert to that training. So if you're not trained that well, you're not going to act that well. Whereas Victoria Police, and certainly in the role that I was in, we were highly trained. We rehearsed, we planned, we prepared for so much. When it happened, it was just, oh, we did that yesterday. You know, this time it was live. You know.
So tell me, George, how are Victoria Police members nowadays? How are they trained?
Training's evolved over the years. Equipment's evolved, technology's evolved. Basic principles are very, I have to say, the same, but I've had close contact with the police agencies since I left the police force here, and they are very good in what they're doing, very focused. It's different. A lot of retraining happened after the police shootings inquiry back in the 80s, and I was in that era, and then it changed for the better. We, you know, obviously not as many people were dying, and thankfully people that are mentally have got mental problems unfortunately show up on the day that some police confront them, and it doesn't work out that well.
What do you think, George, is the best way for Australian police services and forces to arm themselves?
Look, the way police departments are conducting themselves now, they've always had lethal force, and they've got a scale to reach that lethal force, and that's the last thing they need to or hope to use. So they're constantly looking and researching, and our particular business is offering those alternatives to lethal force. And
so you're talking there, when you say lethal force, you mean pistols, guns?
Yeah, which will predominantly result in death. And there are other things. There's verbal jiu-jitsu, for one thing, where people are trained how to negotiate on their feet at the time. What we've got to look at is, indifferent to when I first joined the police force, there was a height restriction, there was physical appearance, the whole thing. And nowadays we've got a balance of gender, and we've got to meet our requirements, our responsibilities to those policemen and policewomen that aren't as physically powerful as some of the policemen from the past. And in fairness, we've got to supply them with that equipment, and that's what the police forces here in Australia, I know, because I have dealings with them quite often, and we try and offer that alternative to lethal force all the time.
Now, George, in one of your previous career roles, you actually supplied and trained the use of tasers to, police services around Australia. Why do you recommend their use?
Look, interesting question. If you had asked me back in 1999 why I did it, because I believed in it. I knew that the police needed this. It wasn't a sales thing, it was just I knew they needed it. I'd been in that arena of not having a lot of alternatives to lethal force. And taser is a phenomenal alternative to lethal force. You can stand back at a distance, so anyone, the operator, can be short, tall, big, whatever, and still be able to expose that particular threat to an alternative. And with taser, it's a incapacitation device. It's not a pain compliant, albeit it does hurt. I know that for a fact.
Well, you've been tasered yourself.
Many times. So has my son and daughter and a few other people close to me. But
is that a personal thing?
Yeah. when you get the opportunity. But the main thing is it incapacitates any person, if it's deployed properly. You hear of failures and so forth. Well, that's operator failure. The device itself works extremely well. Because
that's the issue, isn't it, with capsicum spray that now a lot of members are using, is that often it doesn't incapacitate the person.
No, it's pain compliant. That's why. Because if you're not having a good day and you're not on your medication, you can hit someone with a baton, you can break their bones, you can shoot them, and it doesn't. That shot might not necessarily kill them, but I can guarantee it won't necessarily stop them. Whereas a taser or something like that, a non-lethal, less lethal device, is such a good alternative, because there's plenty of examples where people have been shot, they've died, but not for a couple of minutes, and they've gone on and killed officers in a gun battle.
With your current company, what other sort of equipment do you use and recommend for the use of, police services around Australasia?
Yeah, look, you just jump on the internet and have a look at non-lethal or less lethal options, and there's a variety of them out there. Police have to just determine on which is the best effective tool, and certainly a budget. Some are quite expensive, some are way out there. Net guns and all sorts of things, but we supply a lot of different equipment that the police require today.
What do you think about the Australian police services? Are they well equipped?
Yeah, and they can always be more well equipped. It's just a matter of the research they're doing at the moment, and in some cases we're helping them with that. We're also looking at potentially supplying them with defensive equipment like extremely light shields. So our hope, currently we supply tyre shredding devices that are in every police car. They go to the boot, open up, and there's a tyre shredding device that they can deploy. We want to eventually put in a very light piece of armour, a shield, that any police person in the police force could carry this thing, and it's a great defence to firearms.
It'd be perfect for the use in protests as well, a light shield.
Yeah, it is. They've got specific shields at the moment for riots, but if there was any threat of anyone using lethal force, it's great backup. And it's as light as what the shields they're using now. It's great technology.
Fantastic. Look, thank you for your time today, George. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.